So thanks for taking the time today to join us. We're pretty excited by the response we've had to this webinar, and so we're going to, have some opportunity to talk to you about really sort of how we look at measuring community vibrancy and resiliency using our index, and then hopefully have some time for some questions and answers later on. So we'll jump into it. We're expecting a few more folks, but we'll get going because you all were prompt and probably. Many of you probably have your lunch in front of you right now, so we'll get going on the webinar. So yeah, so Fourth Economy Consulting, we're based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but we're a national economic and community development strategy firm, really looking at fostering action to create great communities, impactful organizations, and strong economies. And so really what that means is we work with a lot of different types of organizations, all the way from regional and state organizations to different kinds of economic development organizations at the city or regional or county level. And we even do neighborhood work. I think all that experience is really driven by these values you see here on our team. Curiosity being the one that these days really is important as we try to look to understand sort of what's happening with recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. And certainly empathy is the other one that I think we've been excelling at in terms of our skills in empathy and understanding sort of the plight that folks are going through right now in many of our communities. And so it's been a hard time, I think, for all of us probably on this call. And so I wish you all well, and I hope your communities are doing well. And we hope that today, by presenting this index, it gives you some opportunity to think about the kinds of measurement that we thought were important going into the COVID-19 crisis, but certainly looking at the back end of this crisis are going to be important for us to think about what makes a community strong and resilient going forward. Next slide. I'm joined on the call today by Chris Worley, who really has been leading our index work, and we'll be hearing a lot from Chris. I know, Chris, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm Chris, one of the analysts at Fourth Economy. Really, the whole team helped put together the index framework, but I was one of the folks that authored the tool, and we'll be talking a bit about the data in this presentation.
And then also joined by Nicole Muse-Kilcucky, our Director of Economic Innovation. Nicole?
Thanks, Rich. And hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. I have had the chance to see the index in action in a lot of the communities that we work in. So I'm excited to share some of those stories and experiences and hopefully inspire some good discussion and questions towards the end of our presentation. Thanks, everyone.
Great, thanks. Next slide. Oh, and one thing to note, we've been around, our firm's been around for 10 years. We're celebrating our 10th anniversary. And so one of the things as we get into this is something that, to Nicole's point, it's not just we developed this as a tool both for ourselves in terms of our work, but also we wanted to make it as an open source resource for folks in our communities that both we're working with and others around the country to be able to use. So today, what we're going to do is really kind of walk you through the index and what the indicators mean. Really show you how to navigate the various comparisons and use the tool in your own community, and give you some ideas about how some of our clients and other partners have been using it, and really how to take it from just something that's sits on a website to really making it something that's actionable. And then again, hopefully we'll definitely have time to talk and hopefully be able to generate some discussion and take your questions going forward. Next slide. Yeah, I mean, so again, 10th anniversary, our firm started, in 2010. I think immediately we started recognizing that there was a series of things that we were seeing in communities that really separated them from others when you started thinking about going from beyond traditional economic development. As our name implies, Fourth Economy, we really wanted to work with communities who are trying to think beyond just the traditional, any job's a good job, and no matter how much investment you attract, like that's the most important thing in a community. And we really started thinking that much more broadly and wanted to find a different way of measuring what does both success look like currently, but also what should you be looking at as you define the future of your community. So we launched the index in 2012. We had a series of indicators. It gradually evolved over a few years. And then when Chris and some of his partners joined our team, we started thinking about how do we create this more of an in the app environment and create it more as a tool that folks were able to use instead of just a static set of lists that we were publishing prior to then. And so in 2018, we were able to launch this app. And I think that's really allowed us to create much more flexibility, and it's used for everybody. Again, it's open source, so creates the flexibility for people to use it in a much more robust fashion. And then this year, we've been thinking even prior to obviously the experience we've had this year with social and civil unrest, that really a focus on equity. Even years ago, we started seeing in the data the disparity in wages, issues around affordable housing, and then just many communities were struggling with that. And so this year, we also kind of tweaked a couple of the indicators to really have much more of a focus on equity going forward. And I think why use the index, right? So I think there's some, really the index at the end of the day has 20 different indicators that, and Chris will get into more detail on all of this. It's interesting. I mean, it's one of the few things probably we started way back in 2012 that has held up. And that is this idea of these themes of investment, talent, place, sustainability, and diversity as being important attributes in a community to think about. How do you score? How do you rank? Where do you fit with both your peers and with other places that your community may strive to be? And so, really looking at data, both certainly on the quantitative side, which is the index, but also then having the qualitative discussions in the community about, do you have the right systems in place to support, better behavior or enhanced performance in each one of these areas? So again, it creates much more diverse portfolio than just looking at a simple, are we creating jobs or not? Are we growing the economy or not? We really want to make sure that people are looking at a much more balanced approach to the function of their economy, both for business and for the people in those communities. Next slide. So yeah, so the index, this is what it looks like. There's not much, we'll go into a lot of more details. So I think just move on to the next slide. I feel like I'm going on here a bit. So yeah, this year we released we do a top 10 list because everybody loves a top 10 list, don't we? And love to have bragging rights in terms of where we fit. So every year we've been ranking different weight classes of communities. So you see here the different sizes of communities that we take a look at. You see where the rankings are. Over the years, some people have been in the top 10 in and out a good bit. There are definitely plenty of newcomers because, again, we've kind of tweaked a couple of the indicators this year. So we certainly have newcomers. You'll see we kind of here we put, who are the leading city, and we do, this is a county ranking, but it's sometimes easier to look at what are those core larger cities within a county to understand where these places are around the country. But you see, obviously some familiar names, but every year, I think when we do this list, we're sometimes surprised of sort of the performance of some communities that we've never had the pleasure of visiting. But I'm sure, and I even see some of you probably on the webinar today that are on this list that, you're doing great things. The performance is showing in the index. And so it's something to celebrate. And so, every year when we do this, we have a handful of communities that publicize, where they fit in the top 10 list. And so it's a fun part of using this tool going forward. Next slide. And then, and there's many more to consider. So in addition to the top 10 list, one of the things when we did the app development in 2018, we also created these clickable map functions that you can actually take a look at different communities. You can really see sort of where, even concentrations of the communities that are scoring well, either in the top 10 or above average, and kind of take a look in a more visual way in terms of where communities are performing better than others. And I think I'm almost wrapped up in my part, but I think that, the one area here is when to use the index. I think over the years in talking to folks who have taken a look at our index, one is that classic, comparing yourself to another set of communities, whether you're doing your chamber is doing a site visit to other cities, or, somebody comes back from someplace and says, man, we should be more like that community. It's one way of taking a look at those communities. And you can actually, Chris will show you, you can actually, pick up a number of different communities that are your peers or places you want to strive to and take a look at how they're performing. One of the things we originally developed was if you're developing an RFP, a lot of folks, it's hard sometimes to get data to say, like, what should we be focusing on? This is a way that you can do that really quickly, see where your strengths and where some weaknesses are that you may want to take a look at as part of a planning process. Certainly local conversations, we've had people that pull it up. People think that they're doing great overall because, you want to be the best in everything, but everybody's got some Achilles heel that they've got to take care of. And I think this allows you to take a look at those areas and figure that out. And then finally, we'll just move on to the next thing. So yeah, I think I'm going to turn it over. It's okay. Identifying peer communities. Yeah, it's good. So yeah, so I'm going to turn it over to Chris and Nicole now. I think they're going to walk you through the index in a much more robust fashion. Thank you.
Yeah, it sounds great. So these next several slides, we're going to talk about the framework of the index. Rich mentioned these areas before: investment, talent, sustainability, place, and diversity. And we know that there's no one solution to hammering home the economic and community vibrancy, but these kind of areas allow us to take a look at where communities stand across them. The first couple, investment and talent, are ones that are kind of traditional to economic development. The later three are ones that we kind of added to look at a more comprehensive view of community and economic development. So what do we mean when we say investment? What we mean is a productive regional economy with active businesses, diverse business ownership. Communities that score well in investment have high rates of business births, entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship, seeking access to capital and risk tolerance, a business community that's representative of the overall population with high rates of MWBE businesses, and a productive regional economy with high economic output. Specifically, the four indicators in this year's index are GDP per employee, business birth rate, female business ownership, and disparity in business ownership by race and ethnicity. And Nicole's seen this play out in a couple of our projects. So I'm going to throw it over to you to talk about that.
Thanks, Chris. So like Chris said, these indicators are really can be very illuminating, especially when we're talking about disparity in business ownership and female business ownership, that sort of thing. But I also just wanted to point out that these are often a starting place, and so sometimes when we are working with a community and we're looking at these kind of high level figures, we know that there's limitations to those figures as well. So as an example, we were recently working in a community that at first glance, when we looked at minority business ownership and female business ownership, we saw, really low rates. And unfortunately, although that was part of the story, the data that is available, that is, publicly available and also collected on a national scale, it isn't always the most up to date. So, at the time, this was earlier this year, we were working, in early 2020, and we were displaying numbers, data that was posted in 2016 or earlier, which meant that the data collection had happened maybe even the year prior.
Yeah.
So just generally a little bit, not telling the whole story. And so what we were able to do, because the community really latched onto that, it doesn't feel good to have a low minority business ownership rate, a low woman-owned business rate. So what we did is we worked with the community to develop a solution to collect more up-to-date, localized, on-the-ground data that can tell a better story. And so one of the strategies that came out of our planning process with this community is that we were able to recommend and start to implement a minority business census. And so this was something that the community could undertake. The local EDO was able to commit resources to, and this really allows the community to get that real-time data, that on-the-ground data that can be updated on a regular basis, and is much more telling of the situation on the ground. And so, just to say that these indicators are important, and it's a good starting place to say, there might be an issue here, but that isn't the full story, and it can lead to some pretty interesting next steps and follow-up.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, and we'll see that pop up time and time again on some of the stories that we tell. So the next area here is talent. We know that talent's important for a thriving economy. A community that scores well in talent has opportunities for the children that grow up in the community to stay in the community, high rates of resident retention, post-secondary opportunities, including community colleges and technical schools, an educated workforce with high numbers of folks that have graduated with bachelor's degrees or above, and high rates of jobs that are available to all residents, and including high wage jobs that are available to residents. So what we look at in our index is a wage equity score, college students per capita, that's including community college opportunities, educational attainment rates, and resident retention. The folks that grow up in the community, are they able to stay in the community with opportunities?
And so, just again, thinking about how this plays out on the ground, last year we were working actually in one of our top 10 communities. So on our top 10 list of small communities, we were working with Laramie, Wyoming. Laramie made the number one slot in that category this year. Not because of our work. They scored that well, before we got there as well. So, when we were working in Laramie, Laramie is a university town. So the indicators of college students per capita and educational attainment were very, very high. And so that's good. But we, see that in cases like that, there can still be a mismatch if, students and talent that has skills that, at first glance would appear to be matched to the local industries are, for whatever reason, not connecting with employers and the positions that those employers are hiring. And so this was the case in Laramie. There was a lot of highly educated graduates, so decent wage rates, some industries better than others, of course. But in other words, there wasn't a huge discount for lower workers that were choosing to stay in Laramie. It was simply that they weren't able to find jobs in their field. And then on the flip side, we saw a lot of employers saying, we're in a college town, we're producing all these graduates, why can't we find qualified people? So, that connection piece is what was missing, not necessarily the caliber of the talent or the industry that was hiring in the region. So, in that case, you see a lot of people leaving the region. Some of that, of course, is due to quality of life, amenities. We saw a lot of people leaving to nearby markets, places like Denver and Fort Collins. So some of that is, just natural quality of life. People want a big city experience. Maybe they'll come back to their college town after a few years in a larger area. But for those that enjoy, the small town feel of a community like Laramie, love the people and the community, love the amenities that are there, that disconnect between employers and talent can be really real, even though the indicators say that, there should be a match. So one thing that we were able to look at in addition as a follow-on, because seeing those figures was kind of jarring, we have this great talent pool, why aren't we, where's that disconnect happening? We were able to look at, degrees that were graduating out of the university over time, and really make some projections about where certain occupations were growing. And what we saw was that, for every one job opening in business administration, for example, there was, 5, 10, sometimes 20 graduates per year that were able to fill that position. So, again, that was an indicator. We were able to dig a little bit deeper and come up with a strategy to address the mismatch and the connection piece, since the talent was obviously there.
So I think next up, we're going to talk about sustainability. A sustainable community is one that's resilient, both in its community and economy, with a mix of industries, sustainable infrastructure present, and a healthy population. In our index, a community that scores well on sustainability has a diverse economy with a number of industries, adding to the community's economic resiliency. That community is prepared to participate in the clean energy economy of the future with renewable energy capacity, and has an active food system with a connection between farmers and consumers, and has residents that experience good public and environmental health outcomes. For our index, we look at things like life expectancy, which is an environmental health measure, industry diversity, local food access, and renewable energy capacity.
So with the sustainability measures, there's some really important pieces that Chris just mentioned. So something like industry diversity is such an important indicator for us when we're working with communities because it really shows the resiliency of the local economy. And so we can look at a lot of different components of industry diversity, but typically it comes down to things like how much of your industry is traded versus non-traded, how much is dependent or import based versus a primary industry, how much of your economic activity is service based versus production based. And so these are really important economic drivers, and they have a lot to do with the strength and resiliency of the economy, especially when we know that in some cases, especially in smaller communities, the loss of a single employer in a single industry can make a huge impact to the people that are living and working there. So industry diversity is a really solid indicator in the sustainability category. But others that Chris mentioned are also very important as well. So food access and its linkages to public health. We know the correlations between poor food access and lower life expectancy in certain neighborhoods, and that's true at the community level as well. And so, there are things that we can look at again, where something like food access is a signal that there may be something deeper going on. It's not like the lack of food access causes public health issues. It's more that they're correlated and interrelated. So we can, in those cases, take a look and say, we think there's something going on here because of the low food access score. Let's look at other health issues if that's of interest to the community. One really example that kind of combines the focus on sustainability and industry mix and renewable energy capacity is an example that's local to us. We're based in Pittsburgh. We have staff all over, but our HQ is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And we've done quite a bit of work in one neighborhood, Clairton, that has a Coke Works facility in their backyard. We saw with that community low food access and also high rates of disease that is threatening the life expectancy of residents in that community. And so one thing that we were able to work on in Clairton was opening a fresh food market with the Economic Development Organization there. So it's an interesting kind of combination, I think, of again, indicators that point to strengths and weaknesses and opportunities for a community like that.
So next up, we've got place. Place measures an active and affordable community that provides a high quality of life for all residents. A community that scores well on place is affordable, and it's a place where workers have earnings that can cover the cost of purchasing a home, goods and services, and where homeownership is a pathway available for all families to build wealth. It's also a place where people can live, work, and recreate, not just a bedroom community. And it's also a place that has access to cultural amenities like museums and libraries. Within our index, we take into account regional price parity, home ownership disparity, the live work rate, and a cultural score based off of museums and libraries.
So with place, the quality of place, of course, has such a big impact on not just people's quality of life, but the ability of a community to attract employers as well as employees to the existing businesses that are operating on the ground. One thing to note is, a community might score really high on something like the cultural score. There may be a number of local museums and libraries and parks, but the accessibility of those amenities and the lived experience of those that are on the ground also matter a lot. And so, we've seen communities where there may be a lot of parks, but there's questions about, are they clean and comfortable? Are they safe to access or walk through in the evening? Are they accessible to people that have physical disabilities? And so, those are things to keep in mind too, even when there is, technically a lot of cultural amenities in the community. Similarly, there may be museums and libraries and other things like that, but do they require a car to get to? And so, one community we're working in currently is a smaller city that's sandwiched in between two larger cities. And, we've heard that while that's an asset, it's a centrally located community that, is really easy for industry and workers to to get in between the cultural amenities that exist in the larger cities that are outside of the community where we're working. It's a 2-hour car ride, and so for those that live in the city because they prefer the walkability of that, they're not able to access those cultural amenities very easily. There's also issues of, social participation for folks that are aging. And Chris, maybe I can turn it over to you
Yeah.
a little bit about AARP.
Yeah, we've seen this in our projects with AARP, who's focused on livability concerns and creating livable communities for folks of all ages. And of course, AARP's mission is for folks 50 and above, but really any improvements for those folks are also good for working families and for young adults and all that kind of stuff. So concerns about aging in place, quality of place, social participation, limiting social isolation, and increasing the cultural amenities that are accessible to everyone are focuses of all sorts of organizations, AARP included. Our last category that we're going to talk about is diversity. Uh, Diversity speaks to an equitable community where people of different races and ethnic backgrounds want to live and everyone benefits from economic prosperity. A community that scores well in diversity has residents from different racial and ethnic backgrounds, positive net in migration, and shared economic prosperity with lower rates of poverty among people of color, as well as income equality across households. So, what we look at when we talk about diversity in our index is income inequality, uh, poverty disparity by race, diversity index, and net migration.
So these are, very important indicators as well. I think they, really influence and also reflect the lived experience on the ground. And so when we, are looking at indicators like diversity and poverty disparity by race or income inequality, oftentimes that data is a starting place to have difficult conversations about how the community is experienced by those that are living there. And so, we oftentimes will show a set of data, and when those indicators are really low, we typically have two sets of reactions from the folks that we're working with, a lot of the decision makers that may not be as connected to the community. They're oftentimes shocked at the level of income inequality or poverty disparity by race. And then on the other hand, we have, community members that say, of course the indicators say that, that's our experience. That's how we live. That's not surprising to us. And so we look at these indicators in particular as a really great way to help bridge the understanding understanding gap, and really start to put everyone on the same level playing field and the same starting place in terms of really understanding, not just at an intellectual level, but really starting to, understand what the community is like for others that may, live next door and down the street and in the next county over. And so, again, this is it's an important thing to look at as a level setting device. And as Rich mentioned, we're looking at equity and inclusion in nearly all aspects of our work. So I'll leave it there for now. I know that Chris wants to share the tool with you. And so Chris, I will stop screen sharing and give you the screen sharing controls. We also just, before we do that, are seeing some questions come through. Thank you. Please keep asking questions as we're talking. We'll get to them once the demonstration portion is complete.
That sounds great. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. But as I do that, I'm going to drop a link to the app tool in the chat. So feel free to visit it on your own while I'm doing that. So I'm going to spend just a couple minutes here. Can everybody see my screen? Nicole, Rich? Okay, great. So here's our app tool. It's got a couple different tabs. This first one is the dashboard tab. Here in the dashboard, you can select any county in the country and come up with a score for that county. List the overall score, scores across the 5 categories, and it also has a brief description about how that county relates to others, both in the state and across counties of a similar population size and region of the country. I'm going to use Allegheny County in our demo. The next tab that I'm going to do is the Compare Scores tab. Now, this is a pretty interesting one. Compare Scores lets you compare scores across different counties. Can you all see them pop up here? Shoot.
It may be a slow to load.
Yeah. This, of course, is slow to load while I'm doing the demo. It could be because okay, so here's a map. We'll talk about that tab next then. Here's the map. This is what Rich was talking about with you could see the geographical spread of scores. You can zoom in on different regions. One of the neat things with this tab of it is you can select from this drop down, looking at either the total score or scores across the different areas. So like investment or talent, and just see where there are little pockets of counties that score well across those different indicator areas are. Okay, now this is all loaded for us. So here's the Compare Scores tab. This lets us compare scores across maybe regional peers. So like in Allegheny County is adjacent to Westmoreland County, for instance. So we could plug those in. It also lets us compare across aspirational peers, say, so like Franklin County in Ohio, which is Columbus, and see those types of things. You can add up to 10 here, so you can look at how you're comparing to your peers that are in your region, or random peers across the US, or some of your aspirational peers. Rich also mentioned the top 10. So here's a list of our top 10 folks, just in a more interactive way. You can click on a county and see what their top 10 is and a brief description and photo about them. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention here is this about section of our index has a lot of sort of like the contextual background that we've gone through in this presentation. And then also lists out each of the data sources that we pull in for our index. Happy to talk more about the data in the question and answer portion, and also about any questions that came up during the presentation. So if you've got a question, feel free to use the chat or the question and answer, but that's it.
Thanks. And feel free to, Chris did drop the link to the index. Feel free to, play around either now or after we're done. It's meant to be really easy to use. We think it's pretty intuitive. So, as you're playing with it, if you see something that surprises you, or you'd like some more clarification or have some thoughts about the data sources in there, or the types of data that we're using, please feel free to just drop us a line. So I'm going to read some of our questions and that have come through so far. So Emily Brown asked, Nicole, what did you call that business assessment again? And Rachel asked, could you talk about how the minority-owned business census is carried out in practice? So Emily, I think that's what you're asking about, the minority business census. And so, essentially what that looks like is the local EDO, maybe in coordination with a chamber organization, or organizations that are really active in certain communities. This can be done. We find it, especially effective when, especially when we're talking about storefronts and community-based businesses that are really serving the local community, getting churches and community groups involved in this effort too, to make sure that everyone gets counted. It's essentially, what it sounds like. It's going door to door or making phone calls in an effort to really identify, one, the businesses that are currently open in the community, to, collect information about those businesses, things like the number of employees that they have, what their goals are in terms of investment, if they need any services, and that sort of thing. So it's similar to a business calling program, but on a smaller and more localized scale. It can sometimes be done with the help of, a local business program at a college or university. This is something that it does take legwork, but it's important if you're trying to get an accurate as you can snapshot of businesses that are operating on the ground in your community. And so that can be really helpful. And let's see. One of the questions that we have, and Chris, maybe you can address this, is from Jamie. Can the level of analysis be done at the neighborhood level? And Jamie, I'm assuming you're talking about all of the indicators that we've talked about so far.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm going to address like a bigger question about that. So we did this level of analysis at the county level because that's the best level to capture where folks work, live, and recreate, and get that kind of community feel. It's also the level where a lot of this data is available at across the US. So of course, we can do a lot more analysis within a particular project, and do. This is, like Nicole and Rich have said, this is the starting place for us. So these sorts of things kind of give us a quick snapshot as to what might be interesting to tack on next and investigate more. So yes, a lot of these types of things do have smaller geographies that we can investigate. A lot of these things too can be aggregated together to form a region or an MSA or something like that to look at that level of analysis. So yes, both directions.
And to expound on that a little bit, we got a couple of questions about data geographic level. And so I'll kind of try to combine them. So in addition to the question you just answered, Thea also asked, what's the level of analysis, county only, municipality? Chris, maybe you can talk a little bit about why it's at the county level, and also address Emily's question, why do some counties not have an index score?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we want to go for here is accuracy as much as possible, data availability, having data for as many places as possible. So those are sort of the things that we try to hit in this, and the county level lets us do that. There are some counties that have a lot of noise in their data. So the US has over 3,000 counties in it. And there's just a handful of those that are really sparsely populated, like under 2,500 people. And so those are the counties that show up as gray that we don't have data for. And it's because what we do to migrate the data from its raw form, to put it on the tool and to put a ranking by it, we have to go through this normalization process. When we do that for really small counties, it just comes up with these completely wacky scores. It makes things that are very small. Say you could have a handful of business bursts, completely change the trajectory for all 3,000 counties. So instead of doing that, we say that may be some noise, it might be weird. We're just not going to include it so it doesn't throw all the other 3,000 or more counties off. Another thing, and I've seen a couple questions in this pop up in the chat. We want to use data in this and indicators in this that are both interesting and telling of something. And so we have data sources that I think data from at least 10 sources in our index. There's some pretty neat ones. The opportunity index is a new one for us. GDP by county was released last year for the first time at the county scale. So we're kind of always constantly on the lookout for indicators that are really, really interesting that we can incorporate into this, and indicators that can be both they're new or at the county scale, or could be updated over time. And we also want to look at the accuracy question. So whenever we use estimates, say from the American Community Survey, for instance, we take a 5-year average estimates for those types of measures. And we do the same thing for like business birth rates. We try to look at longer time horizons that give us a better sense of not the single year variations that a community might be going through, but the longer trends that a community might be going through.
So another question, and Rich, I think I'm going to kick this over to you. The questions from Emily: have you seen this tool be used over time to track progress in community development initiatives, or is it a better fit for a one-time snapshot?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think ideally it's probably better for, each year we publish a new index. So this is fresh. It's a few weeks old at this point. I think it's better to do that one-time snapshot. With that said, I think what you can do then is go back and look. So, you have that data. Chris showed, all the sources of that data. You can go back and look at the individual elements. I think for us, because we keep evolving it, we can't sit still, I guess, is our challenge that we're dealt. And so we keep evolving the tool to make sure it's relevant. Use your feedback. I'm sure many of you will have feedback after you poke around on it. We're constantly getting feedback from our friends, our other think tanks around the country, and certainly from the folks that are using it in their communities. So it does keep evolving. With that said, we're happy to also, if you look at your numbers and want to take a look, if we have them, we do have back the last 8 years, somewhere in our database. So we'll also be happy to talk to you about what we can pull to show you those trend lines as well. But I think what we've tried to do is make sure that the information here is readily accessible, because we want you to be able to use it. And then if you need to go back, look at a particular thing, you can do that with somebody in your community, or somebody on your team probably has access to be able to do that.
One question from William. Chris, maybe you can help answer this one. Do you or can you measure how historic or older neighborhoods or commercial districts overlap with access to outdoor recreation, sustainability, national resource conservation, and so on?
That's a great question. I will say too, yes, that analysis I'm sure is possible. With this tool, this is something that we're putting together, like Rich said every year, and we've got a certain amount of time to put it together each year. Some of the most brilliant things that our team have come up with are just not possible in that time. So like, we've wanted to look at things like urban tree canopy or things like how much concrete is like, are you living in a concrete jungle or a jungle type thing for your sustainability or place metric. And we've shifted around scores quite a bit. Uh, there's things that, and I'm forgetting the organization's name, and maybe Nicole or Rich, you all know this, but the idea of having a park within a 10-minute walk is a data set that's being kind of put together now. And that's one that we're interested in looking at. Um, but yeah, all things are possible, but are all things possible at a county level across the US? Maybe not.
Thanks. That makes a lot of sense. Leah asked a question. Does the tool help us to identify peer communities, or do we have to know that information already and then make comparisons? And maybe we can also touch on what makes a good comparison community.
Wow, that is a great question. The tool is not going to spit out a list of here's who is most like you. Um, we could do that on the back end, given our database of information. And selection of peer communities is always something that is both difficult to do well and easy to do quickly. So the compare scores tab is one where you'd have to know kind of what counties you'd be wanting to compare. Um, Usually coming up with that list quickly, you could do that in 5 or 10 minutes. But to do it well, you'd want to look at long-term trends across things like migration or unique circumstances to your community. So unfortunately, the tool is not going to be able to do that, but it is really good for that like kind of really quick comparison.
I think it also, I agree with Chris. I think the starting place, obviously, of looking at other either small, mid-sized, or large communities is an obvious starting place. But even within the size category, communities vary so differently based on other, geography and other considerations. I think one thing that's easy to do with the tool, especially with the map view, is to look at neighboring communities. If you have a community in mind, again, it's just a starting place. But if you go, I was on a trip to such and such, and they're a college town just like us, why does their business district seem so much more vibrant than ours? So you can look at the score of that place, but it's not necessarily even going to answer your exact question. I think what it is it'll give you some quick snapshots of kind of what's going on in that community, and then there's a level of deeper analysis that you can do to look at the programs and initiatives and organizations, the investment historically in those places that may have influenced those scores. So unfortunately, there's no find my peer button, but it is good to kind of get a sense of how you compare to some of your peers. I don't see any other questions in the chat. So if you do have a question, please enter it now. And actually, Tom just asked a question. This one just popped up. So what is the dependent variable or outcome that you are predicting?
Yeah. Great question. Moving target, it's not it's not necessarily predicting anything. Um, and these are just indicators too. I think the best way to think about this is a snapshot um, and an investigatory tool and a comparison type of tool. Um, we know that there are different ways to measure vibrancy of communities. This is our best attempt to do that in a way that's national in scale, community based, um, and can lead to great questions from clients, um, more places to investigate. So it's not to say that somebody that scores highly in this, if you score a point higher in this, you're going to be X better for it. But um, I don't know. I think uh, that's kind of a difficult thing that we've discussed internally. It doesn't necessarily uh, say an exact dependent variable outcome. It's more of like a exploratory type of tool.
Yeah, and I just saw maybe the final question. I guess we probably are near the end. I think Chris Henson asked us about, expecting to see change in the index figures after the past 6 months. Yes.
Yes.
Right. I mean, I think it is something we're having an active conversation, and certainly for folks on this call, I mean, we'd happy to hear your thoughts. I think that, there is going to be such profound change. I think the challenge for all of us, right, is that the data lags in terms of the reporting of it. And I think, I mean, we've been, like many of you, working in different communities that are in the midst of, still understanding the full impacts of what this pandemic is going to do for our economies. And I think, we're sourcing as much localized data, survey data, certainly the census pulse data, for instance, things like that, that help, take this is, almost like the index is what we knew in February of 2020,
Mhm.
right? What can we pull together right now that gives us some indication of where things are heading? And so certainly it's something that we're going to look at. What should we be measuring in a post-pandemic world? Please help us that soon, right? What are we going to be measuring in that time frame? And then looking at what data, how does that change sort of how we formatted things? And who knows, maybe we add in a whole separate category. Chris is going to cringe when I say that, but add in a whole separate category around, post-pandemic measurement of communities. So certainly, thank you for your participation today. I think that's something, if you want to keep the dialogue going with us, we would love to have that conversation with you about what else we should be thinking, in the future of the next year or so. So with that, I think, we wanted to make sure you had at least a couple of moments before you do your next Zoom, in probably another, 5 minutes or so. So really appreciate you all taking the time and sticking with us during this conversation and showcase. And certainly thank you for the questions. It helps always make us think about things that we should be focusing on. And so we appreciate that. If you have any questions, if you want more further detail, I believe you know how to contact us. We'll make sure you have a link that gets sent out afterwards. And certainly you can just email that engage@fourtheconomy.com is always the easiest way to get a hold of any one of us. We monitor that frequently. So I really appreciate the time. And I guess co-panelists, anything else to say?
I just wanted to let everyone know that as we mentioned several times, we've been looking at equity and inclusion a lot, more than ever, really, over the last several months and the last year, certainly. And we have a webinar coming up next week that I just wanted to plug, because it really, it'll go through kind of how we've applied a lot of the lessons that we've learned and have been helping communities engage in these conversations. So just a plug for that. The link to sign up is in the chat box. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Have a great afternoon.